This Pastor Chiefo. Once again, I want to say a big thank you to my friends at CBIN. Great work going on via this media channel, and I can tell where this media channel is headed. I see the world being discipled entirely via this channel. You know, Jesus did say that before he comes back again, this gospel shall be preached to all nations, and then the end shall come. And I think CBIN is born for such a time as this. And I see the gospel going around the entire globe via the ministries that this channel and this powerful media channel is going to be exhibiting across the globe. But today, I'll be looking at what I call the contagion. And I want you to give me your attention for a few minutes, because this has a lot to do with this moment in time in your life, and a season that God is bringing you into. You know, the contagion speaks about a disease that is transmitted by contact. And that's what we call the contagious effect, because it has the capability to infect you by contact or through the transmission via channels like, somebody who is infected, or through infected surfaces, or when you're touched by fluids coming from someone who is infected. That's what we call the contagious effect. And demons spread diseases around the globe through what we call the contagious effect, the contagious law. The ability to infect and contaminate environments. So that anybody, even when the person who has infected the environment is long gone, anybody who comes into that environment and makes contact with the surfaces that that person who was infected had contact with, suddenly the person gets infected, even though he doesn't know the source of the infection. That's what that contagious effect is all about. So, and at the same time, that is also how God spreads his values, spreads the fragrance of his essence across the globe by infecting environments. Let me use the word, even though it has a negative context, by polluting environments with his fragrance, with his cultures, with his values, so that anybody who is plugged into those environments gets infected by the values of God and begins to talk like him, to think like him, to behave like him, even though he's never made any physical contact or personal encounter with God. That is the law of the contagious effect. And in economics, contagion speaks about a situation where a market is affected by some variables, and suddenly that variable spreads across other regions, other economic, other regional markets, and there are price variations, volatility in price, inflation, all kinds of things begin to happen in other regional markets on account of something that happened in a particular market. That is also how the contagious effect also works. But I want to show you how God uses this to affect cultures, and how Satan also uses this to also affect cultures. I recall I was in JS3 in secondary school when a certain young boy, he was a year my junior, he had this terrible habit. He was masturbating, and we're all in school, and he will go to the bathroom in the morning and will begin to masturbate, and children, just two students, as just like him, will gather watching him doing that. And suddenly he gained momentum, and all over the dormitories children began to masturbate, simply because somebody who was infected by that terrible habit had been planted in that school, and through him, like a Wi-Fi, began to spread those values across the school. Everybody began to masturbate. Same thing. I mean, when I first smoked a cigarette while I was in school, it was simply because I had a classmate of mine who was a good friend of mine who picked up the habit. I mean, my parents were not smokers, but I had a classmate who was a smoker. And then he had this particular cigarette called Captain Black at the time. It was a cigarette that had no filter. and it had this beautiful aroma. And he would smoke and then come into the dormitory and wear that aroma on his body, the way, you know how the aroma of coffee is like. And we all began to long to smoke, and that's how I ventured upon smoking the very first time. And that was when I was in my SS1 in college. That is the law of the contagious effect. A carrier of a disease or a virtue planted in an environment becomes like a modem that spreads the Wi-Fi signals across that environment. And anybody who is planted in that environment suddenly plugs into the same habit, into the same virtue, and begins to exhibit the same mannerisms, So, but the reason why I am bringing this subject in today is to explain to you how nations are discipled, how cultures are spread, how values invade an institution, a neighborhood, and God wants you, and how people can influence cultures and cause and shape the destiny of nations. I want you to understand that you are not an ordinary person. Look at a small device called a modem. You plant it in, for example, the area where I live. It's usually a place where people don't, have, easy access to the internet because of trees and all kinds of, structures all over the place. And, they install what is called, what's it called again? A mast in that area, and via the agency of that mast, the network providers are able to supply, create an environment where people can begin to access the internet via the agency of that mast. And then they go further to plant what is called a modem in your home. And through that modem facilitates your access, and you're able to connect to the internet no matter how remotely domiciled you are in your particular geography. That is how it works. Now, the issue is this. God wants you to be his modem, and the devil also wants you to be his modem. And whose modem you are determines whose values you spread, and determines whose payroll you are enlisted in. And God wants you to be his modem. And in our next discussion after this, I'm going to be teaching you how to become a model in the hands of God. God bless you, and keep living by God's design.